30 minutes in every Sunday for the next few weeks. Our goal is to dig deeper into the important and urgent issues facing our community. Issues like systemic racism, criminal justice reform, and the collective voice of thousands calling for real change in this moment, ignited in part by the killing of George Floyd in police custody. This week, we saw powerful memorial services honoring Floyd, coupled with ongoing demonstrations and protests throughout the Bay Area and around the world. This is video from a massive crowd gathered at Oakland Technical High School on Monday. Nearly 15,000 people standing in solidarity. We are joined now by one of the young men who organized that protest, Xavier Brown. Xavier, thanks for waking up early with us. Let me just ask you, a couple days removed from this, what does it mean to see the photos and video of the magnitude of this crowd?
I mean, to be honest, it's unreal. You know, like I ever thought that it would be this large, but it's a true blessing that it was, and it truly feels like that I made history. You know, that we all made history as a community in Oakland, and seeing these pictures are just a reminder of that.
Yeah, you certainly did. Xavier, we have heard many leaders praise the efforts of young people like yourself. What compelled you to put this together?
I mean, at the root of it, it was simply to stand in solidarity with George Floyd and his community. But to be honest, like growing up, every single time that, you know, someone was murdered over a police brutality, I found that they would be turned into a hashtag, and then it would go out of the public eye after like a week. And I didn't want that to happen. Like, I was tired of that happening. You know, like, these are lives. These are people's lives. And I wanted George Floyd to be remembered properly. So that's why Akil and I were like, you know what, we have to take action. And not only that, but we wanted to give the community a voice and to disrupt the peace with our words, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. Xavier, this physical protest might be over, but I know that your fight continues. What is the message moving forward for your community, and what are you telling your peers, especially the younger ones, about the need to stand up, your generation?
I would say, since the youth are the future, it is very important that we stand up for what we believe in. But because at some point we have to be the leaders of the society. So why not begin now? You know, I think that me and Akil doing this protest is proof that anyone can organize, anyone can protest, and anyone can take action. You don't have to, you know, organize and protest in order to take action. You can donate some cash. You can donate food. You can donate hand sanitizer. You can give people signs and posters. There are multiple ways that you can take action, but you just have to, you know, tell yourself, okay, this is what I would like to do, and this is for the reason. And I'm just going to do it. I mean, it's pretty as simple as that, you know.
Xavier, we got about 30 seconds left, but I would love for you to tell your allies and others in the community, because we saw all races at your protest. What is the message for what they can do right now in this moment?
I would say to not be blind to your privilege. If you are a white ally, please do not be blind to your privilege, and please acknowledge that you have been given an advantage over the people around you. And I think that they would greatly appreciate that.
Xavier, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for what you're doing, and we hope to see what you do next.
Of course.
We have seen many leaders praise these young people for their incredible efforts. We now want to expand the conversation to an organization focused on systemic change. We want to welcome Mona Tawatau, Legal Director at the Equal Justice Society, a nonprofit here in Oakland focused on transforming the nation's consciousness on race through law, social science, and the arts. Mona, we appreciate you being here. Certainly George Floyd is what spurred many of these protests, but this isn't just about him. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Michael Brown, the list goes on, unfortunately. Explain to people why this is about a system of injustice.
Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to join other people in praising Xavier Brown and other leaders of the protests. We owe them, the world owes them a debt of gratitude. And I wanted to tie systemic racism to the protests themselves, because what we're seeing is the protests are not only an appropriate and necessary outcry of anger, but they're actually leading to systemic change. Like we know in Sacramento, the protests have led to the police department saying that they're going to stop using the carotid restraint, the horrible tactic that was used to suffocate George Floyd to death. So I want to tie systemic change to the protests themselves, and also, you know, to respond to your question, at Equal Justice Society, we are transforming, we are working on systemic change. One of the issues is that we have, unfortunately, police in our schools. School districts have contracted with police to have them in schools, many of them armed. I know that the Oakland protests are demanding that be stopped. I know that students in Bakerfield have spoken to this issue as well. And what we do at Equal Justice Society, because Black children are viewed as dangerous because of years, centuries of systemic racism, because they're suspended in really high numbers compared to other children, we have worked on that issue. And one of the things that needs to happen is that police need to be out of schools. The Black Organizing Project has worked on this for years. We need to join with them and others who are calling for this to end, because that ends up with Black students, Latino students in the system and harmed very much in that way.
Mona, I know we've been talking a lot about police reform, but we've also been talking about implicit bias, and we kind of saw that even going back to the global pandemic. When you talk about coronavirus and it affecting communities of color, tell me about that and what EJS can do to combat things like that.
Well, what EJS is doing and will continue to do is to recognize that we have the 400-year pandemic of unaddressed racism against Black people. We have this pandemic that our state has so affected people of color, Black people in our state. Black people, we know, are twice as likely to die in the state of California from the virus. Black, Latino, Asian American people have been lost their jobs as a result of the virus at faster rates. And so one of the things that we are doing is working very hard on ACA 5, which is an effort to restore economic justice and fairness in hiring, in higher education, and in government contracting. And so we have tremendous momentum to get affirmative action restored. And the governor recently endorsed, and we still have to get this to the legislature. It's going to be on the ballot. We're working very hard to put it on the ballot in November. And that is something that people can do. Support that. Go to Equal Opportunity for all.org, and you can join us in that fight, and to make sure that we are bringing economic justice to Black folks in our state and people of color and women as well.
Perfect. Mona, we have to leave the conversation there, but we greatly appreciate you being here and what your organization does as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up after the break, a conversation about calls to defund the police. A San Francisco supervisor and the police chief join me for a discussion. Stay with us. In response to George Floyd's death, we have seen a number of bills introduced at both the state and federal level focused on reform and healing. I spoke to Bay Area Congresswoman Barbara Lee about what we can expect in the coming days.
You've introduced a bill to create a racial healing and truth commission. The Congressional Black Caucus is set to unveil a bill related to police reform. One of the many things that we're seeing coming out of your peers, how important are those governmental actions in this moment?
These governmental actions are extremely important, but I have to tell you, the protests in the streets, especially in my community, are even more important, because this allows for the voice of the people, for our young people, to direct the solutions to what is taking place. And so I'm very proud, and I just want to take this opportunity to say how proud I am, because our young people has formed these coalitions with people that they may or may not have ever worked with before, to condemn, of course, the murder, the brutal murder of Mr. Floyd, but also to talk about police misconduct and brutality in the larger sense, and how many Black and brown men and women have been killed and murdered, but also talking about the underlying causes, and that's systemic racism and it's white supremacy. And so we have to listen now, and we have to inform policies in our legislative efforts with regard to what real solutions that people who are in the streets know will work.
Congresswoman, when we talk about your commission, tell me what that will do and how it will hold people to account moving forward.
Sure, and in 40 countries around the world, maybe more than 40 now, commissions have been set up after horrific human rights violations, such as in Rwanda after the terrible genocide, in other countries. And so the historical context is there in terms of what has happened before. Now in America, we've never had a reckoning with the institution of slavery, with genocide of the Native American people, with all the human rights violations here. So like other countries, we're going to set up our own unique truth commission. It's truth, racial healing, and transformation. Why that's important? First of all, so many people go through school, they've never been taught about all these violations of human rights and degradation and dehumanization. Most people don't even know that slavery lasted 256 years and it just ended 401 years ago. They don't know how these violations of human rights and these stains on the United States of America have led to what they're seeing today in Mr. Floyd's murder. So it's truth-telling time. So what we're going to do is set up a commission that's going to make people aware of the context of systemic racism. And you can't do that until you tell the truth. And you can't move toward any type of healing or allowing for people to say, oh yes, I understand. It wasn't me personally, it was a system of government that allowed for this to happen. And oh yes, that's why we see a disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinx people dying of COVID-19. They never would connect that to systemic racism, when in fact it's right before us. Also, people don't connect the disparities in housing and in employment, the wealth gap. None of these huge injustices are never connected and put in context of what we have in the past.
Congresswoman, you referenced those large protests in Oakland and San Francisco, many of them organized by young people. And we're seeing a very diverse crowd of all ages, of all races. How critical is this moment in really being a turning point for social injustice and reform?
Well, it's a turning point for the country, and what affects one affects all. An injustice against me is an injustice against you. And so I am so happy that the coalitions that we see now being put together, they're white, they're African American, Latinx, they're AAPI, everyone, they're in the streets fighting for justice. And so I've never seen this broad-based, intergenerational, led by young people, protests. And I've been around for many, many protests. I think I've been in every one of them in the country forever. And so I think that this is a critical defining moment. And they're talking about not just tinkering around the edges and solving some problems. They're talking about transformation. Again, going back to my commission, we're looking at how to inform transformation. So what we see is a disruption of the old order and helping to birth a new nation. And that's exciting, even though it's coming out of the pain and the anger and the suffering of so many people who've had to live under oppression and degradation and dehumanization of their being forever in this country.
Congresswoman, that was beautiful. Can't thank you enough for your time, and can't thank you enough for continuing to serve your constituents.
Well, thank you. And let me just remind people that here in Oakland, California, many years ago, the Black Panther Party stood with the community and stood down the police as it relates to police brutality. So yeah, we have a long history of standing up for justice and fighting for peace. So thank you.
We need to take a break, but coming up, a conversation about the calls to defund the police. The police chief will join me for a discussion. Stay with us.
Those dollars need to be focused on our Black community here in Los Angeles, as well as communities of color and women and people who have been left behind for too long. And will this involve cuts? Yes, of course, to every department, including the police department.
Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti proposed up to $150 million in cuts from the LAPD amidst protests against police brutality. It was met with outrage from the police union, saying crime rates will go up. In a similar step, San Francisco Mayor London Breed and Supervisor Shamann Walton want to redirect police funding to the African-American community. To discuss this, we are joined by San Francisco Police Department Chief Bill Scott. Chief, thanks for joining us. I just want to get your initial thoughts about a proposal to move some of your funding to the African-American community.
Well, let me begin by saying thank you for having me on. In terms of reallocation of resources for the betterment of the community, I'm open to that. And, you know, a lot of this has probably to do with my personal background, the way I was raised, my mother who lived in housing projects and was given a helping hand to get on her feet. I understand this. I understand what it's about. And look, we're going to protect the safety of the city. first and foremost. And those that predict doom and gloom, if we reinvest funds to help communities that need it, that's not my prediction. I think this investment, in my take, and we don't know what the dollar amount looks like, but I think this is an investment in safety. This is an investment in security. This is an investment in equity. And this is an investment in racial justice. And those things need to happen. So as a police chief, I, more than anybody, would like to see healthy communities throughout our cities. And so we have to be willing to make sacrifices to make that happen and give our mayor the latitude to do what needs to be done to make those things happen.
Chief, across the country, we're seeing some viral moments of these protests against police brutality being met with alleged police brutality. In your opinion, how has your department handled these protests that we're seeing in your city?
Overall, our San Francisco Police Department has done a good job. We had violence in our city as well, particularly last Saturday night, and things were very bad. I got to see it firsthand. And even in the midst of that violence, we were overwhelmed, to be quite frank with you, and stores were being looted, fires were being set, officers were being assaulted, other people were being assaulted. You know, that, I don't believe anybody wants to see those things occur in any city. And particularly, we don't want to see those things occur in our city. On Sunday, we got additional help. The mayor signed an emergency declaration that allowed to implement a curfew order. And that was really a tool that, along with the resources, the mayor also asked for mutual aid from the state, which we received, allowed us to keep peace in the city. And really, that's what this is about. For the San Francisco Police Department, this is about peace. And how we handled the situation with our protesters here, those that were committing crimes, looting, setting fires, those folks needed to be held accountable for their actions because they hurt a lot of people. And that was our focus. What's really, really difficult in a chaotic situation like that, when it gets that far out of control, it's hard to distinguish who's peaceful and who's not. You have people that are committing violent acts in the middle of people who are out there to protest, not to hurt anybody, but to protest and voice their anger and frustration with everything that's been happening in this country. So we respect that and we understand that. We have a job to do to keep the peace, though, and keep those people, as well as the people who are breaking the law and looting. You know, our job is to keep them safe and alive as well. And that was our primary objective during the heat of what was going on in San Francisco.
Chief, nonprofit Campaign Zero, we're going to show some video here, launched 8 Can't Wait, 8 steps to reduce police violence. San Francisco is one of only 2 of the top 100 largest cities that have all 8. What does that say about your department? But in the same vein, the state DOJ says your department is not moving fast enough when it comes to reform for issues like racial bias. What do those conflicting thoughts tell you?
Well, it tells me that we have to move faster, and we have to do a better job and quicken the pace. And I agree with that. I'm frustrated with that as well. But the comment you made about the 8 Can't Wait also tells you that we are committed to reform, and we're one of 2 cities in this country that has already implemented all 8 of those measures. And I think that's something that this department and this city can be pleased and proud of. I mean, that's a big accomplishment, but it shows our commitment. We're not perfect. We have some things to fix. We still have some things that we have to fix. But even when those things are fixed, and here's what I want people to hear clearly, reform never ends. Reform is a process of continuous improvement. For departments, and I came from a department that was in a consent decree. When I came here from the Los Angeles Police Department, it took 13 years to get that consent decree concluded. The work never stops. You know, what this is about is implementing institutional change so there's a continuous improvement loop, and we have to reinvent ourselves. What's good today for policing may not be good in 5 years. You know, we're seeing a national debate about crowd control tactics and police departments that use tear gas on peaceful protesters. You know, those policies were in place that allowed that to happen, but now we have to look at that critically and see if that is the right measure for today. And that's what reform and change is all about, is institutionalized, creating systems that allow us to adjust so we can keep policing just in this country, equitable in this country, and fair.
Chief, we've got about a minute left, but I want to give you an opportunity to speak directly to not only your constituents that you represent and protect in San Francisco, but the Bay Area about your commitment to follow through in this moment, that this isn't just bluster or politics, but this is real change that we can expect to see.
I am committed, and this department is committed. And change, look, change has to happen. We're seeing protests across this world that I have never seen in my lifetime, demanding that change happens. And some things will be done right away. Some things need to be done right away. But also we got to take a step back and be thoughtful about change so the change that happens makes sense. You will never hear me say that I'm satisfied with the pace of our reform currently with the San Francisco Police Department. But I can tell you I am committed, and I can tell you the people around me are committed. And we need everybody to be committed. We need the public to put pressure on us, and they will, and they have. We need to hear everybody's perspective, and we are working to do that much better. But this change has to happen, and some things have to happen right now. The departments are looking at their revisiting, including our department, our use of force policy. We found some gaps that were voiced in the police commission this past week, and we're going to change some things immediately. And, you know, there's a process with that. There are labor laws, and we have to work with our unions and policing to make sure that, you know, we follow the law when we have change to happen. But change has to happen, and it's going to happen. And that's my commitment to the residents of San Francisco and the people in the Bay Area, that we will get this done. And it's going to be a process. It's going to be a thoughtful process. Some things will happen immediately. Some things it will take longer. But we will get the things done that we need to get done to change this narrative. And let me just end by saying this. I want to be very clear. This issue and the way we police the African-American community in this country is in the forefront of this. And we in policing have to own up and acknowledge the history of policing as it relates to the African-American community. And we have to not sugarcoat the issue, because policing needs to change, period. But we have to change how we police the African-American community in this country. And that needs to happen now.
San Francisco Police Chief Bill Scott, sir, thank you so much for joining us. I hope we can continue this dialogue and that we can continue to see the benchmarks as you talk about the change that is needed and the progress that we hope to make as a community. Thank you very much.